morning, everyone, and welcome to the Lead Seat. This is Marilyn Clark. Thanks for joining me today. My guest today is Nicole Poole-McGill. Thanks, Nicole, for joining me today. Nicole is an executive leadership coach and a purpose partner. And Nicole, can you, for my readers, kind of tell me a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So, in terms of my background, I've been in learning and development for over 25 years now. And I started in instructional design, and that was something that I was really interested in how to create training for people and guide facilitators and learners through what they were consuming in order to build skill. From then, I kind of fell in love with being a facilitator too of content. So I love the people part of it, connecting and working along with people to help them learn and to build skills around their career and to enhance their career. That led into a lot of coaching and consulting with my business partners in the organization that I worked with at the time as that skill for myself started to grow. So the consulting component grew, and then the coaching, the one-on-one, people sharing what they wanted to achieve, and working with them to make sure that that was something that they could do and creating a plan around it. So that coaching part of it really was something that I gravitated to and started to do throughout my career, along with instructional design, curriculum design, and development. And at this point, I really focus on executive leaders and mid-level managers to build those skills around their leadership as well as how they manage their employees and ultimately what they want to do in their career, what's their purpose. Even if it's outside of corporate, how their purpose outside of that connects with what they do within an organization. And I've been doing that for quite a while. So a huge passion for coaching and connecting with people.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting you say that because L&D, and I'm so glad to see that over the years, because I have a heavy background in it too and have seen it grown. But
Mhm.
it's interesting to see how organizations now are kind of recognizing that coaching is a piece of
Yes.
that it's not all about go to a classroom or do
Mhm.
a e-learning class on the
Yeah.
computer or even a
Hmm.
blended class. It's more that coaching piece is so important for the application of what we've learned,
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
supporting you
Hmm.
to institute those behaviors into your schema of things when it comes to your work. So it's really
Absolutely.
exciting, to see that organizations are really taking are really accepting and looking at coaching as a positive and required piece of L&D.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So today, Nicole, I know we're going to talk about barriers to authentic leadership.
Hmm.
And I know you expressed to me that this is a passion that you have, being
Hmm.
authentic in your leadership roles.
Hmm.
So let's first start off and talk a little bit about what is authentic leadership in today's corporate environment.
Yeah, to me, and I think it is aligned with the official, authentic leadership definition is bringing yourself to a space where you could be you. You know how we say "do you"
Mhm,
or this is a part of who I am and my characteristics. So when I show up, I don't want to have to shift or feel like I have to comply to what's expected in order to lead a conversation, to lead people, to lead a process. So if I show up, I want to be Nicole. When I
mhm,
show up, I want to be quirky. I want to, connect with people. I want to share, not too much, right? But I want to share in the sense that I'm connecting and relating to the people that I'm around, as opposed to potentially fitting a mold of leadership
mhm,
that people expect to show up because you're a leader,
mhm.
right? So that's how I see authentic leadership.
Okay. I think about for me, leadership, authenticity, I guess you could
Mhm.
say, is to me is like being able to um, not have to do what the term dual, what we call dual consciousness. That was a term that was coined
Mm-hmm.
years and years ago. I forgot the guy's name. What is his name? It's a black man that coined that. Do you remember what his name was? I can't remember. It may
No,
come to
I
me.
don't.
But he talked about dual consciousness, meaning having to, act one way when you're in your own social or family setting and then
Yeah.
coming to work and have to act another way that isn't really the true you, but it's
Mm-hmm.
a simulation kind of thing. It's a
Yeah.
um, fitting in kind of thing that people have to do. There was a book written in I think 2000 where two women had done a study,
Mm-hmm.
and this study was on dual consciousness and understanding authentic leadership. They were kind of the pioneers
Yeah.
on leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was called Our Separate Ways, by two
Mm.
women. They did an 8-year study on it. So I like that authenticity is being more accepted. Do you feel that
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of being more accepted of you being able to come in as Nicole every day?
Think so. I think so. And we used to call it code switching. I think people still call it
Yeah,
code switching,
that's the new
especially
term.
for
Yeah,
Black
that's
talent, Black
that's the new
professionals. Like
term.
we're going in a certain way to fit the mold, even though the appearance is we're
Uh-huh.
still who we are,
Uh-huh.
but we have to switch that. It can't be laid back social, what we would do with
Mhm.
our family and our friends, because it's this mold of professionalism that has bias in
Mhm.
it, that we're expected to fit into, and we're encouraged to as well. My parents, you have to work 10 times harder because of how you show up and who you are as a young Black uh, professional
Mhm.
in the corporate world. So that code switching or dual consciousness is very it's ingrained
Mhm.
in most folks who carry a person of color into a professional setting. So it's very real, and it's something I
Mhm.
felt like I had to do early on in my career. To me, in my head, it was like, this is how you're professional. I didn't recognize the bias in it. I didn't recognize that it didn't have that authentic component of it.
Mhm.
So I had to, be someone different and learn what the mold is in order to fit in it
Mhm.
with being who I am, and in order to do what I think or thought at the time was to succeed,
Right.
right? Within that environment.
Got you. Got you. So, when it comes to, organization, let's talk a little bit about organizational barriers and culture.
Mhm,
So, how
mhm,
do certain workplace cultures discourage
mhm.
authentic leadership? What have you seen around that?
The things I've seen is that they have an expectation for people to show up a certain way or to show up like them, right? And what I've seen in terms of corporate America is, because I'm still just a few of well, it's just a few of us in
Mm-hmm.
terms of being Black professionals
Mm-hmm.
in my world now, and it's always been that throughout my career. So, in terms of organizational culture, when that doesn't happen, or when they see you differently, when they obviously have to up front, but if you show something different from that mold, then it's like, how do we get her to do this or him to do that? Or I don't like that about them because it's not fitting in their mode, or they're not responding the way they would,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's so much, and that's so strong. Those expectations are very real. And I think everyone feels them in a different way. But when you show up as someone who wants to be authentic,
Mm-hmm.
but you recognize very quickly that that's not acceptable
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in certain situations, then depending on the person, and I would say even early in my career, I'm observing and I'm fitting in. not even realizing that I'm not being authentic to
Mhm.
myself. I'm doing what is considered professional, and I'm doing things that will help me succeed in my career, as
Mhm.
opposed to showing up as who I am and sharing who I am and responding based on who I am.
Mhm.
Just I'm looking at what's been set as the expectation to do so.
I see.
Yeah.
That kind of leans on emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And so how can a lack in that situation with people coming in, what would you say to people or to new leaders? How can a
Mhm.
lack of emotional intelligence become a barrier to leading to authenticity? To
Yeah. Yeah, with the lack of emotional intelligence. So if you have emotional intelligence, you're more in tune in how your emotion impacts what happens, and you're also more in tune about how other people, react to certain things and how you can potentially help them with that. So if there's low emotional intelligence or a lack thereof, it's very hard to identify yourself being authentic, and the expectation is that everyone else will show up doing a certain thing and not be authentic to themselves. So that authenticity, as part of my coaching practice, the theme of it is empowerment through authenticity.
okay.
Right. So you become empowered by being who you are. Of course, there's boundaries, right? You're
Mhm.
not telling all the business,
Right,
or
right.
you're not showing up like it's a football game or a birthday brunch.
Mhm.
You are showing up in a professional setting, even though you've identified some of those biases, but you're still talking the way you would talk and could, excuse me, connecting with people the way you would connect with them, and showing some vulnerability in a sense, depending on the situations that are happening, and not just looking outside of it and trying to manage and handle people in their own little bubble. You're in the bubble with them, and
Right.
being more empathetic
Right.
to what is going on when you have a higher level of emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
being self aware, right? And also connecting with people and creating relationships that will allow you to see them for who they are, as
Mm.
opposed to seeing them in a place you think they should be.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So can you kind of tell us maybe some specific emotional intelligence skills that you feel are necessary to maintain your authenticity in leadership?
Absolutely. A few that come to mind, well, one in particular is being emotionally self-aware. Knowing how your emotions show up and how to manage those in different situations, and being authentic to yourself. Like if you're not feeling right about something, how do you share that without kind of just disrupting the conversation? But even if it is a disruption, maybe it's something that needs to be said. Also, I think self-perception, how am I perceived? How do I perceive myself
Mm-hmm.
in my role as a leader? And then if I have things that I want to be that I'm not yet, how do I fill that gap? How do I build that skill in determining how I want to show up to people?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, to myself, because I want to be proud of what that is, and I want to be aware. But also, once I do that and become that person, how other people are receiving me as well. So those are a couple I can think of. I'm sure there's many more, but
Yeah.
when it comes to emotional intelligence, it's all about what I feel and how I'm managing that, and how I'm sharing that with other people, and in the center of my authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, self-awareness I think is really kind of key and how
Hmm.
you and when it comes to emotional intelligence and leadership because self-awareness to me means being able to understand yourself and be aware of it could be the way you talk, the way you walk, the way you dress, but
Yeah.
that balance of
Mhm.
I'm aware of who I am, but that balance in order for me to stay true to myself. I have a little story to tell you, and this is what I
Mhm.
did. And this is before I met Audrey, the job I had before I met Audrey. I
Mhm.
was working for a company and I had an office. And
Mm-hmm.
so how I showed my authenticity was we were able to decorate the office. Okay, first of
Okay.
all. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so how I showed my authenticity was I bought a print. It was
Mm-hmm.
a print of, oh, maybe it was a little abstract of women, kind of ballerinas or dancers, right? And it was in pastel colors, but it was by an African American artist. And
Mm-hmm.
so I put this painting. So this was the painting I put on the wall behind my desk, but
Okay.
that was kind of my way of
Mm-hmm.
showing my authenticity
Mm-hmm.
without, you're right, poking the bear or pushing the needle or anything. And
Mm-hmm.
people would come in and compliment me on this
Mm-hmm.
picture that I
Yeah.
have. I have it in my living room now. But that was some of my self-awareness, how I did my
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness when it came to still being able to, be within the societal expectations, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, but
Yeah.
still show my culture, I should say.
Yeah.
So,
But that's I love
go
that
ahead.
story,
Uh-huh,
and the way I can relate to it is my hair, right?
uh-huh,
When I went into corporate America, I had the straightened hair, I had a certain style. Usually it was in a bun with a little bang,
mhm.
and that's how I rolled at that
Right,
time, right?
right.
As I got deeper into my career, and I tell sometimes some of my younger colleagues, the deeper you get into your career, the less you care about what people think of you. And
Yes.
that's just true for me, right?
Uh-huh.
And toward the middle of my career, I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to try the braids. I'm going to try the faux locks and
Mhm,
all that.
mhm,
And then when I did, I received a little differently
mhm.
in the corporate world. It was like,
Oh, yeah.
oh wow, the questions, is that your hair? Can I touch it? Is it, I'm just like, no, that's a
The
whole nother
microaggression
podcast.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. That's a whole nother podcast. But it was different for me because people saw me one way and then they saw me another. And
Mhm,
I think that was more so them think, oh, she's being more ethnic in that sense. But for me, it's like this is what I love, this is what I like, this is what I do, and I'm gonna show up.
mhm,
My job isn't going to
mhm,
change, my skill level isn't going
mhm.
to change,
No.
but to be authentic to myself and be who I want or do what I want to do is what I'm going to do in this
Right.
space.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I remember I stopped straightening my hair, I guess 2006. But I was out of
Mm,
corporate by
mhm,
then in 2006,
mhm,
but I stopped straightening my hair too. And I know
mhm,
that was a big thing back,
mhm. It was.
back in the 80s and 90s. That was a big
Mhm,
thing. When it came to your hair, you would never have thought to wear an
mhm.
afro. You would never have thought, wear
Yeah,
braids at that time. So
yeah,
it's nice to, it's good to see. That's why I'm saying, I've watched the evolution
yes.
of us as, African American professional women over the
Hmm.
years, and I've seen the progressions. And even in when I would teach, when I used to teach at the universities and stuff,
Hmm.
we used to talk sometimes about, especially when I taught organizational development,
Hmm.
we would talk about the dynamics of organizations and
Hmm.
how it works and those kind of things would come up. We would
Yeah.
have discussions around that. And so, Nicole, I wanted to ask you next a little bit about social media, okay,
Mm.
societal expectations, because we're kind of
Hmm.
on that vein. So, what
Yeah.
role does social media and public scrutiny play in influencing leaders to project an
Yeah.
authentic image or inauthentic image, one or the other? What
Yeah,
causes
it's
me not to be, what's the
mhm.
pressure there?
Well, the fact is, as humans, we consume everything like visually, audibly. We consume those things, and when we see so many things being projected in
Hmm.
social media, or by leaders, so-called leaders in the political world too. I think anything that we consume visually or audibly, it's just like, okay, how is that impacting us? Even if it's a little bit, even if it's a lot of it, it's just impacting us in a certain way. And depending on that individual and what they feel like they need or that gap, they look at stuff like that and say, okay, I can be like that, or I want to be, or I need to be in order to be accepted. Because the thing about social media right now, what it's turned into is not just communication, it's like, how can I be accepted? And
Mm,
that's the framework. That's the framework. I look at that, okay, then with social media, I have to look a certain way or wear certain clothes or do certain things in order for people to like me because all the likes are adding up when they do that. All
mhm,
the likes are adding up when they say that. So how do I, and I think this is across ages, I think it's across educational backgrounds, I think it's across all those things in that, like I said, even if it influences us a little bit,
mhm,
we start to either question or shift
mhm,
toward that way because we see it's being recognized and liked and talked about. So it's really that self-awareness. It goes back to that emotional intelligence and that self-awareness. If you know who you are, you're less likely to bend and flex to become something different. To grow is one thing.
mhm.
To imitate because um, it's there's a focal point on it. It's a totally different thing.
Right. And in what
Yeah.
ways? Tell me a little more about that when you say
Mhm.
the balance there with that, focusing on that.
Well, I think the balance is admiration versus envy when it
Okay.
comes to social media.
Okay.
If it's admiration, if I admire something, like when I used to see Michelle Obama on screen, just the way she carried herself and her presence, it created space for people that most leaders didn't really create space for, right? And I admired that. I didn't envy, oh, she does that. And it was something that I wanted to make sure it was part of my brand to create
Mm-hmm.
a safe space for people. And I worked on that in terms of how I approached people. My level of listening increased. The connection was so very important.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have more self-awareness, some of that social media influence is something you may consume and see, but it's not something you necessarily embrace, especially if it's just for the likes or it's just to become popular in some sense to whatever audience. So when it comes to leadership in that, like I said, you can admire something and see if you want that to be part of who you are if it's not already. But the envy part is what I think stifles and stops, or you're doing it all for the wrong reasons,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when it comes to the message that you want to get across, and I think it comes out as inauthentic when it's
Mm-hmm.
not part of who you are or something you work toward to make it part of your brand or your personality.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm kind of looking over some of the questions here, and I wanted to ask you your thoughts on this. Um, on vulnerability and authority. Is it
Mm,
possible for leaders to both balance vulnerability and authority and be authoritative? And
yeah.
how do they strike that balance?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I definitely think it's possible, but I also think a number of things need to happen before it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the connection and relationship has to be there with leaders. Whoever you're leading, you have to have that relationship that is, and it doesn't have to be a deep relationship, but just a connection in the sense that I know you and you know me, not
Right.
just as a professional. It doesn't have to get deep in the personal, but just knowing the person and making sure there's rapport there, there's feedback that's honest, there's the respect and the reliability there, and it's mutual between the leader and whomever they're working with. Yeah. And so when it comes to that, and setting that or creating that relationship, and also setting expectations and sharing expectations mutually, I think that's very key too with the people that you're working with. What are your expectations of me? What here are my expectations of you? And we may talk about how, I'm the final decision maker. It's my responsibility to do that. But in the sense that if we're in a situation where I can be vulnerable, like I've witnessed situations where in a former company there was going to be a big layoff, right? And it was all rumors and speculation.
Mhm.
And the manager brought the entire team into a conference room. That's before all the virtual stuff.
Mhm.
And we got in the conference room and he sat down and said, I know you've heard a lot of things, and some of them are true and some of them aren't true. And what's very true is that we're going to be significantly impacted by the changes that are going to happen.
Mhm.
I'm even going to be impacted.
Mhm.
So I can empathize with the fear. I
Mhm.
can empathize with the worry you have. I don't have additional information because I'm part of the people who could be impacted, and I'm scared too.
Mhm.
I'm scared and I'm worried for my family,
Mhm.
and that vulnerability. When I witnessed that, I'm like, wow, I did not expect that. I expected
Mhm.
them to come in the room and say, look, keep doing your job. We don't know what's happening. We got stuff to do.
Right.
We have to
Right.
make these clients happy. Instead, he sat there and he started off with a big sigh, and kind of slumped a little bit. It's like, I know what's going on. I feel it. It's impacting me too. And I want to acknowledge the fact that I know you're worried and I know you're scared. And but he was still an authority figure. He was
Mhm.
still the leader of
Mhm.
what we were doing. So that's an example of how it can show up in that
Right.
sense, because you're being human, you're being a
Yeah.
person,
Right.
and
Right.
not the mechanical figure that sometimes people expect in a professional setting, or as
Mhm.
a leader, always saying the right thing, doing the right thing, and
Mhm.
keeping the business sense or the business conversations,
Right.
and not the human part of it, bringing
Mhm.
their whole steps to work.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I know I saw something on here about that
Mm-hmm.
because for me, when I think about when I went to school, I was all about leadership because I just coming through it just really bothered me the way leadership was defined, how you fit into this
Mm,
mold, you
yeah.
had to be identified, all this crap, right? And so having I've seen the leadership kind of evolve over the
Mhm.
years, and they always had these different labels for what kind of leader you may have been
Yeah.
or you should
Mm-hmm.
be. And for me, leadership is so fluid and flexible and should be, and the vulnerability and all of that comes into play. So I had a question here about leadership styles, and
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to ask, how does pressure to conform to certain leadership styles
Mm-hmm.
hinder your authenticity? Like
Yeah.
transformational versus transactional
Mhm.
versus authoritative or periodical, how does that pressure, how does pressure to conform
But
hinder?
yeah, I think it has a lot to do with culture too. If the culture of
Okay.
the organization is to
Mm-hmm.
be authoritative, then you feel like you have to fit in that mold, even though everything about you is transformational. But you
Mm-hmm.
see that
Yeah.
that's what's required in the culture, and you do it. But I'm more so like you with that flexibility and being fluid. It reminds me of situational leadership, right? When you think about someone in particular, you're actually focused on an individual and
Mm-hmm.
seeing what they need. Do they need more hands on, where I'm directing them and understanding that this is what they need as a new person, or this is a new task? Or do I know they have a lot of competence around this, but they need some guidance? So am I going to coach them?
Mm-hmm.
Do I
Mm-hmm.
need to coach them through this task? Or do I
Right.
know they're fully equipped to do this? I just want some checkpoints. I'm just going to leave them to drive this on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So just imagine being just a directive or a directing type leader and someone who's perfectly capable of doing the job and you're micromanaging them,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Or if there's someone who is new to doing a task and you just delegate it to them and say go do it when they have no expectation or no goal around it.
Mm-hmm.
So that situational leadership is so very important, and it still keeps your authenticity because it brings it back that emotional intelligence of being
Mm-hmm.
self-aware,
Right.
right? I'm self-aware that I, feel like there's a certain way that I want to address people and I want to meet them where they are. That's
Mm-hmm.
part of my authenticity as opposed to doing what the culture dictates,
Mm-hmm.
which is to be one way and get the job done.
Right.
Right, get the job done no matter what,
Right.
no matter what sacrifices or
Yeah.
everything. If they know or they don't know, they need to know. If they don't know, they need to go.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I work with leaders. Sometimes you run into leaders like that. Um,
Hmm.
I've seen that happen, and it doesn't really turn out well.
It
I'll put it to
doesn't.
you that way. It doesn't
Hmm.
turn out well. When we
Yeah.
think about people and what it used to be, well, years ago, like I said, leadership has evolved. So, and
Hmm.
um, that authoritative, type style. It was like, suck it up and take it.
Yep.
And it's evolved and it's changed, and it's nice to see, um,
Hmm.
because I believe this probably may come from what they're teaching in universities now
Hmm.
under the umbrella of leadership in organizations, and the
Hmm.
research that has been done, and how
Yeah.
things have changed, for the better for people. We're
Yeah.
looking to support and empower and grow people as a part
Hmm.
of managing them, because that authoritative means you're managing something, you're not leading.
Stay tuned for part 2 when we continue to speak with Nicole Poole-McGill on barriers to authentic leadership.